Hello everybody, I'm Craig. Welcome to the OAG's Beginner's Guide to RC video. What we're going to do is take that Tamiya Grasshopper 2 Black Edition box kit at the back and turn it into an RC that will look something like this, which is an original Tamiya Grasshopper from back in the 80s. And what I will try to explain to you along the way is all the bits and pieces that you need to do in order to turn that kit into one of these, and all the additional bits and pieces you need to pick up to be able to run your first RC. So if you found this channel or you found this video and you're new to the hobby and you're looking at what we can do to get into it, this is the place for you. And occasionally, as you can see over here at the side, we do get little visitors of cats that come along to enjoy the build with us. Thanks, Martha. The first thing you need to get is a kit. Now, this particular one is a Grasshopper. It is an entry-level RC. It's suitable enough, I think, for kids to be able to build up on their own or with supervision of an adult. It's a fairly straightforward chassis to build. It's two-wheel drive, so that means that the motor powers the rear wheels here, and the front ones are free spinning and are used just really to provide balance to turn the car. There are four-wheel drive versions of RC buggies which have power to the rear wheels and to the front wheels, and they will have something called a drive shaft that runs from the front to the back and help turn both the wheels at the front and at the rear. I would recommend to start with, you either pick up an entry-level four-wheel drive buggy, such as the Tamiya TT02B, or you pick up a two-wheel drive buggy, such as the Grasshopper, or a Tamiya DT03 chassis or a DT02 chassis. These are entry-level. They're usually priced in the UK somewhere between £100 and £120. However, buying the kit alone is not enough to get you started. You still need some other bits and pieces. So let's take a look at what else you need in order to build one of these kits. One of the most important things that you get your hand on early on is a transmitter and receiver. So the transmitter looks like this. This is what steers your RC and also controls the throttle with the trigger here. This is more of a modern style trigger setup for a transmitter. There are also some that have sticks that you control with both thumbs. One side will control your steering, the other side controls your throttle and your brake. It does have a screen on the top of this one where you can connect multiple vehicles to the one device. Not all of them have that capability, so it's worth making sure you check out when you're picking something up. This model here is a Fly Sky transmitter. I've been using this exclusively for my cars for the last, I don't know, 3-4 years. I like this model because you can connect around about 10 cars or buggies to each transmitter, and then you select through the menu which particular car you want, and you can name them as well. It has all of the options that you need in order to set your car up, so it will allow you to alter the sensitivity of the steering as well as altering the sensitivity of the throttle and the brake. Important when you're learning to do RC with young children, because you can alter the throttle sensitivity, so you can essentially reduce the speed of the model so they're not driving it off and crashing it into walls, and you can also alter the sensitivity of this. The steering also can be trimmed. What that means is you can move the steering to the left and the right so the car runs true. And when we're setting this model up, or as we go through the build, we will do the trim, and I'll show you how that works in terms of the setup on the transmitter. You can also adjust the trim on the throttle and the brake, but with modern electronics, you don't tend to need to play around with that. And we have another cat visitor. This is Joey. He likes to come over and say hello whenever we're building RCs, don't you, buddy? Is you have to have something that receives the signal, and this is a receiver. So this goes onto the RC buggy, and what this does is it has communications from the transmitter and turns that into signals that it pushes into other parts of the car to help it do the things that you need it to do, like turn and control throttle and brake. Typically, if you buy a transmitter, you will receive a receiver, no pun intended, along with that purchase. And this one here comes with the Fly Skies. The cable is important. That actually helps the radio signal to transmit across to the receiver. So you need to make sure that is in the model somewhere and up high enough that it can ensure it can receive that signal at range. Joe has come because he's very interested in the end of that cable. So he doesn't take my hand out when he's doing it. Thanks, Joe. You can buy separate ones of these, which allows you to connect those multiple. Do you mind, Joseph? Multiples of these, which allows you to connect multiple cars. So you only need one for each buggy or each car that you put together. But if you buy a pack of these, then you are able to connect up multiple cars as long as your cat doesn't destroy them. Right, Joe? So you've got a transmitter, a way of communicating to the car, and you've got a receiver, which is a way of receiving that communication from the transmitter. The next thing you need is one of these. Now, this is an electronic speed controller, or ESC for short, when you see that abbreviation used. What this does is it plugs in here into your receiver, into one of these pins. The prongs there always face up north. If you think of the receiver as that way, they always go up. Okay, so that plugs in there. That then takes those communications for your throttle and feeds it into the ESC. These two connectors here go to a motor, which I will show you shortly. And this connector here is a battery connector that goes to a battery, which I will show you as well in a moment. There are some little spacers that you can see in here. If I come a bit closer, those spacers there allow you to change the modes within this ESC to be able to do two things. The top one allows you to alter whether you're able to have forward, back, and reverse, or just forward and back. And the bottom one allows you to select between two different battery types, a LiPo battery and nickel metal hydride. I'll explain the difference between those two in a moment. Mine is set up for nickel metal hydrides because of the batteries that I use, and because I'm not trying to race or do anything clever, I'm able to use forward, brake, and reverse. These ESCs are all pretty similar. So this one is badged up from Schumacher Racing, and it is a Hobbywing Quick Run 1060. It enables you to run off a 2 to 3 cell LiPo or a 5 to 9 cell nickel metal hydride. What that means is you can run different power batteries or different size batteries and different power batteries through this setup to those parameters. If you go beyond that, you can't guarantee that this is going to work. I think these ESCs are pretty good. There are alternatives, but for me, these are reasonably priced and very easy to use. They set up pretty much immediately once you turn everything on. And I have, other than a couple of burnouts because I've overloaded them with higher power motors, I've never really had too many problems. So, a good place for us to start. Now, once you've been able to connect up your ESC and had throttle control, you also need to be able to turn the vehicle from left to right. And that's where this device comes in. So this is a servo. And what servos do is they have a series of cogs in between that turn data communication. Again, that plugs in, as you saw before, into the receiver. It takes that communication and it turns this spine at the top, left and right. This little gear. What you put on top of there will be a servo horn, which I'll show you once we get into the kit. It goes on the top of there, a servo saver, and it allows movement from left to right, which will turn the steering arm front and back and control the vehicle. These come in standard sizes. This is a standard servo. You can get them that are shorter as well and lower, but these tend to retail at a reasonable price. What you've got on the top there is the weight or the torque that this servo is able to put out. So this is 5 kilo. It's an analog, so it's not a digital servo. There are different types. There are digital and analogs. Digital ones tend to be a little bit more expensive than the analog ones. I cannot remember what the difference is, but this is a perfect place to start. A nice cheap servo. It doesn't matter if I break it because it's replaceable, and you will break these. They will go wrong. They will fail. They take a lot of load on them. You can pick them up from places like Amazon. You can pick them up from a model store. I would recommend going for a mid-of-the-road sort of servo. I've had some issues where if you get some of them that are overpowered, they can overpower your ESC and overload the ESC and burn that out and break it. I personally go for standard size servos. I tend to go sort of 5 kg or around that, maybe slightly higher depending on what I'm putting it into. And then I'm not fussed. Some are analog, some are digital. It's also worth bearing in mind that with this and the ESC, these are not waterproof. So you can get waterproof versions of these, but as standard, they're not. So when you're out with your RC buggy, don't go smashing it into the puddles. Don't go driving it into the sea, because all of this stuff will stop working. If you want to do that type of activity with your RCs, go and find some waterproof versions. They are out there because these things go into model boats as well. So you can get waterproof ones, but you will pay a little bit more money for them. So servo, ESC, very important. And of course, the last thing that we need to go and source is a battery. Now, this particular battery is a nickel metal hydride battery. It's made up of a number of cells. This one's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cells. And it has a connector there that plugs into the connector on the ESC. So this is what's going to power our buggy. And this particular one has got a hump back to it because this fits nicely into the Grasshopper. Other ones have that hump down the end here, and it's just a straightforward pack that slots into the bay of your RC. Tamiyas, most Tamiyas will take a standard 6-cell nickel metal hydride. So that's what you should go out and buy. This particular one is made up of 3,300 milliamp hour battery cells. What that means is the bigger that number, the bigger the size of the battery, the more power it contains in it, and the longer your run times will be. Now, your run times will very much depend on the size of your battery and also the size of your motor in the RC. You can get 7-cell batteries, which will be called an 8.4 volt battery. They don't always fit in your RC, so I would advise against buying a 7-cell nickel metal hydride. Go for a 6-cell or a 7.2 volt, sorry. You can also get a LiPo battery. I don't have any LiPo batteries. They require a little bit more maintenance and a little bit more looking after. They do carry less weight and therefore can make the car go a bit faster. They also have slightly longer run times, and they are more consistent in the power delivery and therefore protect the gearboxes and the transmissions in your RCs. Personally, I prefer the simplicity of using these nickel metal hydrides. I can charge this thing up. I can leave it on the side. When I'm ready for it, I pick it up, I drop it in my RC, and I drive. With a LiPo pack, you have to put it into storage mode, and then when you've finished and you're ready to charge it up, you have to get it out, put it on charge, ready for your run, drive it, run with it, and when you finish, put it back into storage mode again before you put it away. So it requires a bit more maintenance. If you're doing this with kids and you're doing this the first time you've done it, my recommendation, get yourself a nickel metal set. Get a charger. The chargers, typically, if you buy a pack like these Overland ones here, the Tornadoes, you buy a pack of these from Overlander. There's the website at the bottom there, overlander.co.uk. You buy one of those, you can buy one that comes with a charger. The chargers are fine. I've been using them ever since I got these. They're fast chargers. There are other chargers on the market that can charge multiple batteries at the same time, that do all sorts of clever stuff. For me, keep it simple, nice and easy to use. And yeah, batteries is probably the biggest area of problems. Now, this one is covered in duct tape. And the reason it's covered in duct tape is because at some point it fell out of the RC and all got tore up. So you do have to be careful with your battery bays, especially with a model like the Grasshopper, that your battery doesn't fall out. So batteries, we've got our battery, we've got our ESC, we've got our servo. We've been out and bought ourselves a transmitter and receiver. We now have everything to start building the kit, except we might want to consider a few tools. Perfect place to start if you are looking for a set of tools to build RC kits is the Tamiya Craft Tool RC tool set. 8 pieces. They are, well, the blue ones, they're also a red one, but the red ones, and I'll explain the difference in a minute, the red ones I don't think are quite as good as these. So what you get in the kit is a holder for the screw sets. They are triangle shaped, so they fit in there quite neatly, and they grip really tightly in there, so you don't have any problems when you're using it. You get a couple of hex socket sets. You get a larger one here that's usually used for wheel nuts, and a smaller one that's used for any nuts that go into the build of the model. They're very, very handy. There are other sizes, but those two will probably cover most things. You've got a 5.5 and a 7. So you get those in there. You also get a flathead screwdriver, which is really handy when you've got to lift and pull things off. You don't tend to see many screws that need a flathead in the kits, but it's always useful to have one of those around. You then get 3 hex drivers. So these are starting to look a little bit worn, as you can see there at the end, because I've used them quite a bit. I'm probably getting ready for some new ones. The little one here is really useful when you're putting pinions onto motors, and we'll show you that as we go through the build. The pinion is the small cog that goes on the end of the motor, and they tend to use a little tiny little grub screw that uses that one there to connect it. These two, probably not going to see much use to those in this build, but always handy to have a set of hex drivers, which you get in this set. And then lastly, you get 2, and they look like Phillips head screwdrivers, as you can see there. They look like a Phillips head, but they are not. They are a Japanese standard JIS screwdriver, and they are slightly different. I would love to explain to you what the difference is, but I cannot remember off the top of my head. But what I will tell you is if you don't get these, okay, some JIS screwdrivers, and you are trying to build a Tamiya kit, you run the risk that you will strip the heads out of the screws as you're putting them in and out. Since I've been using these, not had a single problem. Before, I was using a standard screwdriver, and I did wreck a couple of screws when I was building one of my kits. So let that be a warning to you. Get a decent set of these. You can buy other JIS screwdrivers available on Amazon and other places like that. Personally, I think the Tamiya ones are good quality. They're definitely worth the money. I've had these now for about 2 years or so, and I've not had a problem with them at all. They are starting to get a little bit tired, but then all tools will, over time, start to erode and decay. I've probably built about 20 kits with these now, and I'm very, very pleased with them. So that is the sort of tools that you need. But there are some other things that are useful. So you can go to town with tools, and you can end up with all sorts of things for all sorts of applications. But just trying to keep things simple for beginners, these are the types of things that I came across when I was learning to build RC kits that I found really useful. So the first thing, these are cutters. And the best time that I find to use these are when you are cutting all the part trees off, all the plastic part trees off. And they just give you a nice cut every time you break one of them off. Now you can sort of twist those plastic trees off, but it's a lot neater and a lot cleaner to use this, and that's especially important if you're cutting anything off that is going to spin or be close up to the gearbox mechanism. So that's really useful. A pair of pliers are often useful. These were out of a cheap tool set that I had, and I use them for all sorts of applications: gripping things, holding things, pulling things. I would love a set of sort of soft nosed ones which have little rubber covers on their noses that just protect the parts that you're holding, but for now that's what I've got, and they've done the job perfectly. This we will use in this build. These are it's a tool designed pretty much for RC, and it allows you to hold a piston when you are building shocks or tie rods, which are steering connectors, and shocks are the shock absorbers. You use this to hold the rod while you're screwing other parts to it. I found these to be very, very, very useful. You can also use a pair of pliers to do it, but this just seems to help with the job a lot more than I found with others. And you've also got some little measurement checkers on there as well, which can be handy from time to time. So they are very, very useful, and there are other ones available. It's always good to have a modelling knife on hand. You probably will find a better use for this if you've ended up with a polycarbonate body to cut out, which will come onto the scissors as well in a moment. But this can also be useful for if you've got a bit of leftover plastic. You can use the modelling knife just to chip away at that and get the plastic off. Good tool to have around. Be very careful though, because they are super, super, super sharp. And there are many people who have got modelling knife injuries because they've not been careful and putting the blade back or the blade cover back on before they've picked them up or put them down. So just be very careful with those. I've got two different pairs of scissors. This is a Tamiya polycarbonate scissor, and it's curved, and you would use this when you're cutting out one of the body shells, and it allows you to get around some of the tight areas and the corners. There's many different types of these. These are Tamiya ones. If I'm honest, these are very good, but I had a different pair that I lost somehow. I don't know where I put them. I must have put them in a bag when I was chucking out some rubbish. And they were slightly thinner, and they were a lot easier to use. So again, check out Amazon or eBay, and you will find yourself a pair of modelling scissors. Or even better, check out your local modelling store, and they'll have some of the options like this. You can also get these from Hobbycraft and things like that. And then finally, these are extremely sharp, but extremely useful. These are Tamiya sticker scissors, and I use these for cutting out all the stickers and the decals that go on the bodies of RCs. You will get, and you will see as you open up the kit, you do get stickers in there that need cutting out from time to time. And having a pair of scissors like this really do help. Now, you can use a pair of nail scissors, but they can be quite fiddly. And if you're doing a lot of them, they really start to hurt your fingers after so. They certainly hurt my fingers after some time. So I got these recently, and I'll tell you what, these are amazing. Absolutely brilliant. And you've got that extra little bit at the back there to give you a bit more control as you're cutting and doing some of the very fine decals out. But I think these have been an absolute find. So if you can get yourself a pair of those, they are very, very useful. You don't need all of these things to be able to build a kit, but they are helpful, they are useful, especially these, and especially a pair of scissors to cut the stickers of the body out, and a pair of pliers. So what do we get inside our kit? Well, two of the most important parts of an RC car are the body. This is a hard body shell. It doesn't need necessarily to be painted. So you could get away with just putting some stickers on that, sticking that onto your RC car and running. And that's one of the reasons why I do like the Grasshopper. The Lunchbox is another one where you get a hard body. This one's particularly good because this one comes in black, and the model that is black, and the decals go onto a black body, so it is very useful. The normal Grasshopper comes with a white body, which again can be used. If you remember, I showed you my old body shell a moment ago. That was just stickers straight onto the body. I didn't paint that in any way, shape or form. I just whacked the stickers on, off we went, and we were able to drive the car pretty quick once we put that on. With this one, I might paint it. I do have a tin of Tamiya paint over here. This one is a metallic black, so I thought that would give this quite a nice effect of having a metallic body paint on it. There are different types of Tamiya paint. The TS is for a hard body shell like this. There is also a PS, which are used for the polycarbonate bodies. I don't have a polycarbonate body here, but they are see-through clear body shells in plastic. This paint will go on the outside of this body. If you've got a polycarbonate body, the PS paint goes on the inside of the body shell, so you're spraying it on the inside. So you do have to think about how you're going to get your various paint effects, and there are loads of videos out there of people showing you how to paint RC cars. I am not very good at painting. I don't feel confident doing that on camera, so that's not something I've got a tutorial for, but I can put some links in the description of this that shows you places where you can go and see people who do really, really good jobs with these. So that's the body. This over here is our chassis. So that is pretty much the base of the RC. Most things get bolted to this. You've got suspension, you've got your rear gearbox back here somewhere. The wheels will mount in here somewhere and mount onto that as well. That and that are two of the most important parts of the body. And you can see very quickly, if I just pop that on the back of there, that is pretty much what your body starts as, and that's how your RC gets built up. So everything else bolts to those two bits to put your body, your RC car in a place where you can go and drive it and run it. There are loads more stuff, and I'm going to keep getting them out now and showing you what else you get in your kit. One of the lovely things about these RC kits is everything comes disassembled, and you have to put everything together. So what you get some wheels, and you get some tires, and then you have to put the tires onto the wheels, and thankfully all of these tires are replaceable and you can get spares. over time as you run them, the little grippers will all wear down and the tread wears down on the tyres, and then they go bald, so you have to replace the tyres on them after time. It's just like running a real car. You won't do that immediately, but the more you drive off-road with these things, or you drive on the asphalt, you will wear down the tyres and you will have to think about replacing them. The front ones are pretty hard wearing. The rear ones will go first because this particular model is rear-wheel drive. So here are your plastic parts trees that I mentioned earlier. This is what you need those clippers for. All of the plastic parts tend to come on part trees like this. And then in the instructions, as you'll see when we go through those, it tells you which parts you need to cut off. And each part tree will be labelled at the top there with a letter. This is part tree C. And you'll see that each part has got a number against it. So you're able to locate the right parts you need for the step that you're on during the build. It's very straightforward. It's like building a big Lego kit, really, that allows you to find the parts a lot quicker and cut them out as you need them. Most Tamiya kits also come with a little box inside, and inside here is all of the hardware that you need in which to build the car with. So you would tend to grab your hobby knife and just run that along, cut off the sellotape that holds it all together, and get yourself into the hardware box, making sure you put the lid back on your hobby knife and don't cut your finger off. And then what's in here is all the hardware and various parts that we need in order to complete our build. So we've got a bumper there, that's going to go on the front of our Grasshopper. Set of gears that go inside the gearbox. This one here is going to be our differential gear, and these here will be the drive gears as well. We've got in this particular kit a set of shock absorbers that we have to build up. So I will take you through how to do that. So they all go with the shock absorbers. We've got a driver figure that can be painted up separately with some different modelling paints and put into the cab. And that is the servo saver that goes onto the servo that I talked about earlier. And again, when the time comes, I will show you how to do that. In here is our motor. This is a brushed motor. What that means is it has brushes inside the motor that help it do its thing. You can get brushless motors, which are, if I'm honest, have a lot more power. I think that would be an overpowered motor for an entry-level Grasshopper like this. Brushless motors don't have as much resistance, and therefore you tend to get better run times. They are more gentle on the gearboxes because they provide a different level of torque. There's all sorts of advantages for brushless motors. Personally, I like brush motors. I just think they're easier to get hold of, and they often are cheaper as well and easily replaceable when you damage them or burn them out or wreck them because you've been driving your RC too hard. So, motors, very important. What else do we have in our hardware bag? Well, you get these bags over here. A, B, C, and D. And as we go through the instruction manual, they very clearly reference the steps against these bags. So the great thing is you can take those ones and put them to one side, empty bag A into a little Tupperware tub or something similar, and that's where you start. You start with these parts here, you follow the manual, and you build your kit from there. In here is also a load of hardware that will be required for the building of the shock. So when we get to that point in the manual, we're going to need that bag. That's probably going to be around bag C, something like that. So that's everything else that you get in the kit. Let me just grab the instruction manual. We'll take a look at that next. Final bits of stuff that you get in your RC kit is you will get a set of terms, important information about the kit that comes from the manufacturer and distribution company. Not so interested in reading that. You also get your instructions. So for us, this is our Grasshopper 2 instruction manual, which will also have information within it about what you need. It tells you over here all those different parts that you might want to consider picking up. You've got your ESC, transmitter, receivers, batteries, etc., etc., as well as information about some paints and some tools that you might need. at the bottom. It then gives you a load of information about how you should drive your car sensibly, how you should look after your electronics, and some great little cartoons up here about painting on a sunny day and being calm and careful when repairing your car and not shouting at your dad, I think it says up there. Then what's great about Tamiya is you go step by step, and each step has all the parts that you need listed over this side with one-to-one diagrams so you can match everything up and make sure that you're getting the right parts for the build. And you go through and you follow the instructions and you build your RC car. And everything is in English, German, with some Japanese thrown in just for good measure. So I think it doesn't get any easier really than a Tamiya set of instructions when it comes to building an RC car. For this particular model, we have an additional set of instructions because we've got the black edition, which is slightly different to the standard Grasshopper 2. So we do have a few extra steps that we have to be careful of when it comes to fitting the front arms, touching the bumper, building the shocks are separate, and then we also have some separate instructions on how to put the stickers onto the body. And then here are our lovely Grasshopper 2 stickers that don't look like they're pre-cut. So we will be using our sticker scissors when it comes to doing that and putting that on. And last but not least, you always get a wibbly wobbly aerial that goes onto your model. These have been included in the kits since the 80s. I personally don't think they're quite needed these days. But what I do like to do is cut them down a bit shorter and have a nice short aerial sticking out rather than a great big long wibbly wobbly bouncing around all over the place, which do get damaged when you roll your car over. Right, we've looked at everything that comes in the kit. We've looked at the box. We've looked at the tools that we need. We've looked at all of the bits and bobs. We've got everything. We are ready to build our Grasshopper. So let's get started. So we are ready to get started. What I've done is emptied all of parts bag A into this handy tray. When I was a kid growing up, we used to always use biscuit tin lids as Lego holders or whatever it might be when we're rifling through it, or a tray when we were looking for parts. So get yourself something to put your parts in. You can get metallic tubs that you can put them in. I have recently been using sort of bead sorters that you can get from the hobby centre, and you can put all your parts, sort all your screws out and put them all in there. Especially when you're doing more complicated kits, it really is necessary that you make sure you know where everything is. So we get to step number 1 on our instruction manual, and it says we need to charge our battery. Now luckily I've already got a bit of charge in mine, so I don't need to do that, but step 1 always is make sure you've got a fully charged battery ready to help you when you're building your kit. And then we're straight on to step 2, which is building up our gearbox. Now it's a good time for me to show you about an extra little bit that you might want to consider when you are building your RC cars. These are bearings, and these, my friends, are bushings. Now bushings are Tamiya's solution, I suppose, to keeping costs down in the kits. These things serve a purpose because if you're going to go and ride your car out in through puddles and into the beach and all over the shop, that will probably not corrode in the same way that these might, because it's just a piece of plastic. However, that is not as efficient when it comes to gearbox running as these things. So this has got a rubber seal, 2 pieces of metal and a series of ball bearings on the inside, so it spins quite freely around the axle. These things, you have to grease them up and lubricate them, and they spin on an axle such as this one, and they will spin. But you can see there's quite a bit of resistance that comes on those unless you grease them up. These things just spin freely on the axle because they're designed that way. So my advice would always be go online, look at the kit you're buying, go to a website such as UK Bearings, UK RC Bearings, and pick yourself up bearings for the kit that you're building. Buy them. I always buy rubber sealed because I run my cars on the dirt. They do just sort of regular metal seals, or they do rubber seals. So pick what you want, depending on how you're going to run your RC, and use those instead of the bushings. Yeah, and the rubber sealed ones will help protect against the dirt and the wet as well. So that's my top tip. Now what I tend to do when I build is I tend to lay the parts out down this side that I'm going to need. So I'm going to need one of these metal rods, the rear shafts in there. So I'm going to put that just up there so I know I've got that. I will be needing 3 of these bearings. So I'll grab those out and pop those over this side next to where it says plastic bearings, but I'm going to be using those. I also need this smaller bearing here, which replaces this metal bushing there. So I don't need that, but I'm going to use that little tiny bearing there. I've got a 5 by 30 millimeter shaft that I need, and I can just lay it on the pitch, you see, and it matches up 1 to 1, so I know I've got the right thing. And I also need one of my counter gears. So there's a bag of gears in the box somewhere, which I have now buried beneath everything else that was in there. So I'm now hunting around. There we go. There's the bag of gears. And from there, I do need to grab, I'm going to keep these in the bag so they don't roll out all over the place. You will find that there are staples that pop off everywhere when you are building a Tamiya RC kit. One of my only complaints is there are staples and plastic bags all over the shop. So that there is my counter gear. So I need that. Interesting. And I also need the large bevel gear, which is also in here, this one here. So I think that's everything that I need in order to build up step 2. So I'll go ahead and start doing that. On the instructions, there are all sorts of little symbols that are telling you need to grease things up. My recommendation would be don't grease up the shafts or the bearings, but definitely you'll need some grease on the gears. And I'll show you what that looks like very, very shortly. And I've just realized I've missed something from what I need, because I also need that spacer there as well. So I'll go ahead and get all this put together and show you what it looks like when you've finished. And he's also realised that I will need one of these gearbox pieces as well. It says that I need piece B4. So we check that we've got parts tree B, which we have. And then number 4 is this one over here. So I'll grab my little clippers. I go in and I just clip that off of the parts tree as close to the edge as I can do. There you go. And that is now ready for me to assemble. Okay, so it's asking me to pop a bearing in the housing there. Another one needs to go on the outside of the gearbox there. Quite a tight fit, so you really have to push those in well. So we've got those in both sides. The counter gear is going to go in there, like so. And that is going to go bearing in that side, bearing in this side. Now those bearings will pop out. This is not my first rodeo. So we're going to slide that onto the axle, like so. There you go. Perfect example of a bearing popping out. So let's pop that back in there. It's quite good to keep those things flat once you start building them. And we need to grab this. We need to put the spacer onto it. And we need to put the bevel gear on the end of it. So that goes through there like so. Been a while since I built a grasshopper, and then that spacer is going to sit there like that. And then all of that is going to slide into there like so. What we see now is we've got our gear, counter gear at the top there, looking good. So what will happen is there'll be another gear that sits between those two. So when this one turns, the other one turns, and we're all rocking and rolling. So the only thing it's asking me to do now is asking me to grease all this side of the gearbox up, which I will do, but I'm probably going to do it when I open this grease up so I don't get grease everywhere. And then we'll grease that up all as one go, because step number 3 is building up the other side of the gearbox, which you can't see. So we're going to go ahead and build up the other side of the gearbox, and those two parts eventually will just fit together. So step 3 has us using our first screw. What you've got here is a little cover that goes over that hole in the gearbox, and I can't remember off the life of me what that hole was there for. I think it's so you can re-grease the gearbox, yeah, without having to open up the whole gearbox. So you can pop that off, pour some oil into there, some grease into there, and then seal it back up again, and it just helps lubricate. Do you know what? Not all Tamiya kits have that functionality, so that is pretty unique and pretty cool. So I'm just going to go over here and check the size of my screw down here to make sure I get the right one, and then I'm going to pop it in there. And all the screws for the plastic is self-tapping in these types of kits, so you literally are just going in once, nice and easy, and bang, you're in. And that's where these JIS screws work so well, because it just fits in there and gives you all the right amount of torque. So there's no slipping, you're not popping out. You can see with that particular screw that you could have used a flathead screwdriver across there if you wanted to, but they definitely are JIS standard screws. So that is on. Okay, we have got our counter shaft that goes in here. Sorry, not counter shaft. What did I say counter shaft for? It's a bevel gear. Now that has got to be careful. That's come loose. That's not fitted in properly. So let's just get that back up. Careful with these things. There we go. Now we're in. So we've got that one this side. So that's 2 halves of our gearboxes ready to go. Again, nothing has been greased up yet, and we are ready to turn the page and move on to step number 4, which is going to be building the differential that goes in the middle. Now this is where I will grease everything up. So I'm going to build the diff, grease the diff up, grease both gears, both sides, and then I'm going to attach the whole gearbox together in one. I've never built a Grasshopper before. This is the first one. I've serviced my other Grasshopper because it was from the 1980s, and I just picked that up during one of the pandemic lockdowns and rebuilt and repurposed it back into a running RC. So those counter gears have gone into the differential like that. So that's just a gear differential. In some RC kits, this goes into a sealed gear, a little bit smaller. These gears inside are smaller again, and they drop in, and they'll have these these large gears here. I can't remember what they're called. Just large bevel gears will go top and bottom of that diff, and it's all in one sealed unit. And then you have the drive shafts outputting from the differential unit itself, rather than it all being encased within the gearbox. So this is just a very simple, different design. It dates back to the 1980s, but it works very well nonetheless. So we've got that together. I'm going to put that into this side, and the reason for being is I'm going to be able to grease this one up, drop this in, grease this, grease that, and then we're greasing everything all together. Grease is the word. So let's open this up. Good, it's already open, so that's going to be great. I'm going to put a few little blobs of grease. I'm going to put a blob there at 12 o'clock, one at 3, one at 6, one at 9. And that should be enough for this particular gearbox. Now, I do believe you can never have enough grease, so if you feel that you want to put more grease in, then please do so. Then we're going to locate the differential onto that. Drop that in, so that's all greased up there. What I'm then going to do is I'm just going to just going to put a little bit of grease on there. Rotate that around a little bit, and you'll see already the gearbox gets absolutely covered in grease. There'll be loads of it. You see these gears are already starting to spin, and they're getting covered with a bit of grease from the other gear as well. So we're just starting to make a mess of everything, which is great. So a little bit of grease all over that gearbox there. Lovely. Then I'm going to bring this one over, and I'm going to do the same again. 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock on there. I'm going to grease this one up in the same way. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then this one down here, I'm going to just pop a little bit of grease on this one as well. A bit more tricky down there in that gear, that's for certain. Just sliding around a little bit. A bit more on there. Like so. Don't know how easy that is for you guys to see on the camera, but you see I'm just running around. If you've got a very small paintbrush, that's always a good way to grease up your gears as well. So I've got grease on all of those gears. I've got grease on those gears. What it's now asking me to do is to pop these two gearbox halves together. I've got to get it round the right way. Like so. So that goes in there, that goes in there. And we're just going to mash it all up so it fits, clicks together. Very good. And then I'm just going to give it a little turn. So you see through there. And that gearbox is now going to be all greasing up. Lovely job, feels good. All right, so I need to get 4 of these longer self-tappers now. I'm just going to check the length of those at the top. That's right, it's perfect. So once I've found one, what I then do is find the others that I need and just stand them all up. Just check visibly that they're all the same length. It just saves you having to go back and measure each one. And then I'm going to locate where each one of those is going to go in the gearbox. So they're coming from this side. I've got 1, 2, 3. Where does the 4th one go? I wonder if it goes down there. We'll find it in a minute. I am sure of it. So let's do those first top 3. So first one goes in there. Push him in. And everything that you do, my recommendation is you just do it so it's hand tight. You don't need to go to town, you know, don't need to push these round and round and round until they tighten up, you know, to a ridiculous force. They just need to be hand tight. So that's 3. I've located 3. I've just got one more to find. So if I look at the manual here and I hold the RC in the same direction, we've done the top one up there. We've done this one here. We've done the one in the bottom there. And the other one does look like I was right. It looks like it's going in there. So let's just get that inside the gearbox there. There we go. And it's taken it, which is great. That means I found the right spot. Lovely. There we go. Gearbox all together. Nice and spinning free. And what you've now got is a differential that works. If you hold one side tight, the other one will still spin. And then if you hold this one tight this side, this one spins. And that's how the differential inside the gearbox works. It allows both axles to run and turn independently. And if I turn them both at the same time, they both move forward and back as well. So you get full movement, both sides and together. It's a very clever design. Right, gearbox has been built and constructed and greased, more importantly. So the next step is we've got to set up our motor and get the motor mounted into the gearbox. Right, there's a couple of steps when it comes to putting the motor together. So the first thing the first thing I've done is I've laid out all my parts. And the first thing it wants you to do is it wants you to attach this onto the motor. So you're going to lay that over the top. And I'm just checking the instructions because you need to make sure you get this the right way around. There are some holes in there for some little nuts. So you've got to put your nuts into those holes, like so and like so. And making sure that they are flat. For some reason that's not, there it is, it's flat now. So that goes in there, like so. Right, we've got to pinch those nuts onto the back. And you line it up so there's the two black holes, the two holes, one at the top, one at the bottom. And then these little tiny flat-headed screws. That was me saying that you don't often see flat-headed screws in a Tamiya kit. And here we go, we've got a flat-headed screw. Goes in there. And that is attaching this plate to the motor. So I'm going to screw that round until it fits. And we'll do the same with this bottom one. Now this is not standard. And the reason this is not standard is this motor is a very, very, very small motor. And what we're doing essentially is putting this plate on the outside that turns it into a bigger motor. I suppose that's the best way of describing it. Tight. And you want to make sure those are tight because that is all that's holding that plate onto that motor. So there we go. Nice and firm. And what's going to happen now is when I put this onto the gearbox, this piece is going to sit on the outside of the gearbox, going to go either side, and these screws are going to go through this outside cap here, like that, and they are going to mount to the motor here and here. So that is going to sit in the middle of the gearbox, spinning around and driving our counter gears inside the gearbox. Whereas if it was a bigger motor, those would just attach straight into the motor. They wouldn't go into this plate. Makes sense? Good. I'm pleased. So we now get our gearbox. The motor is going to go on, let me take a look. Flip it round this way. The motor is going to attach to this side of the gearbox here. And you'll see there's a cutaway on the motor. That means it slots in there like so. Okay, so that goes there. And over here on the other side, you'll be able to see how that meshes up the gearbox. You see, the gear meshes in there and meshes up with the other gears, so that's good. And then these bits, these longer screws are going to go into those two holes there, match up the other side with the gearbox, which they have. I'm going to grab my screwdriver, which I've put down somewhere and cannot find. There it is. And I'm just going to now screw these in against those two nuts that we put in a minute ago. I can feel those instantly bind in with those nuts. Really, really, really clever. How it all just fits together like a glove. And I'm going to, again, just hand tighten. You'll know, you'll feel when they're tight. And we've got our gearbox in. So now, that is now spinning against the motor. And it's at this point you can get yourself a AA battery and you can pop it either side of the motor and test to see if the motor's spinning. And you can go back the opposite way. Perfect. Good little test to make sure that your gearbox is all free and spinning, because if it isn't, you've got a problem somewhere. Very difficult to get it wrong with a Grasshopper, if I'm honest, but test has been done. So the only thing that's left is for us to fit these two pieces either side of the gearbox. So this one here goes on this side, like so. And then we're going to get one of these screws, pop it in there. And that is going to be an attachment for the suspension at the rear. So there's one done. And we're going to do the same the other side. So slides on there, screw in there. And just like that, you have completed your gearbox section. And also, congratulations, you've completed part bag A. And you are now on to part bag B. First thing part bag B wants you to do is center your servo. So what you have to do is you have to get your ESC, your servo, your ESC, your battery, and one of these. And what we're now going to do is we are going to connect all of these things together. So you always start off with your receiver, right way around. And I always put the servo into channel number 1, which is right at the bottom of this particular receiver. And those, let me show you that again. The little pins on the outside, the little gold pins, always go up. So that's how you know you're doing it the right way. They go in there. Then I always put, so channel 1, steering first. Steering is the most important thing. And then the ESC goes into channel 2, like so. So what we've now got is our ESC and our ESC and our servo connected up to the receiver. The next thing we can do is we can pop some power into the ESC. So now I've got those two connected, I'm going to connect to my battery. Now everything's turned off at the moment. I'm now going to turn on my receiver, which is on. And then I'm going to turn on my ESC. And what should happen is you should hear the servo come to life. Did you see that? Let me try it again. Turn off. So our servo is now centered, which is exactly what we wanted. So all that's done is it's taken this to the middle point. So that means we can now attach things to this servo. So what we now have to do is go and find the P part stack, which is the servo saver stack. And we're going to put together P6, 4 or 6 or 5, depending on what type of servo you've got, 4, 3 and 1. And then find the corresponding screw and screw it all to our centered servo. Now, just some advice. Which part you use out of 5 and 6 depends on what type of servo you've got. So most servos you find will be a Tamiya or Futabu piece that you'll fit to the top. Some of them won't be, and that's when you need to use P6. P4, P3, P1 is standard. And then which screw you use all depends on the size the servo requires. So a Tamiya one will need a 10mm. And if it's a plastic one like this one, then you'll use a self-tapper. If you've got a metal gear at the top of your servo, then you'll use one of the other screws. All explained down here. You'll use one of the threaded ones here that isn't self-tapping. Make sense? Good. I'm going to go ahead and do that step and show you what it looks like once it's complete. Okay, so it is important when you're doing this that you check out this diagram in the bottom corner and note the orientation of your servo is the same. So I've done that. So this first piece goes upwards. Now, it's not going to line up 1 to 1. It's not going to be straight up. So don't worry if it looks slightly off center. We can sort that out with the trim of the servo afterwards. So that's on. We then put this piece which forces on around that first piece. That's the saver element. That springs backwards and forwards, saving the servo in the event of a crash and an impact, which is what you want. That goes down. Now this, look, is where you have to be careful. So I've cut that off the sprue, but you see how it doesn't fit in? That's where I've kind of just got it not neat enough. So what I want to do is take this and just shave that off of there and get that smooth. So if I go back now to here, that piece should, he says, just go in there. There we go. Get a screw, pop it in, and then I'm going to turn it and screw that into the servo. Now this servo is live and on. You can hear it there. So that is now nice and tight. So you see now this now provides the throw of the steering. And we are ready to go. It's quite a good servo, that. Good. Servo ready to go. Next step. Right, I've popped all my electronics to one side. I don't need those for the next bit. What I'm now going to do is build up these steering rods at the top. So the steering rods will attach to the servo, and then as the servo turns, the steering rods will turn. They attach to the wheels, and then the wheels turn left and right. Over here, you've got the measurements for those rods. So as you build them up and you put these ball cups here, either end of the rods, you can check as you're twisting them on, twisting them off, that they line up to these measurements across the side. So you'll notice one of them is 90 millimeters and one of them is 73. And it's important to get that right. Okay, we've made our steering rods over here and they match the lengths perfectly. What we're now going to do is we're going to get our servo here, and we've cut these two pieces off the parts tree, and these here are our servo mounts. So this is going to hold the servo like so, and then the servo will bolt into the chassis. There we go, servo mounts are on, and then the last thing for us to do is to get the left and the right ones of these, and we're going to just thread them in. So they go underneath, through, and then twist it. That's the long one on the right hand side in, and then we're going to do the same with this one over here on the left. Going to go up there, push it up and through like so. And that's both of our steering arms on to the servo. Now that is a very, very basic servo setup, but it is absolutely perfect for the use in the Grasshopper. Quite a lot going on in step 8. We're going to mount the servo onto the chassis using these at the front. We've also got to put another body post mount in the front as well. Then at the rear, we're going to put these at the bottom. That is for the battery door that fits into the bottom. We're also going to put the aerial mount in over here. And then we're going to mount up all of our electronics inside the chassis. There's a lot going on. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and mount this up. This is as simple as just following the instructions and matching up the hardware. You've seen plenty of that now. And then I will show you how you go about putting your electronics into the chassis. So there we go. We've mounted up the servo with the mounts going and being screwed in on the underside. We have put this screw in here, which mounted the front body post there. we've got these two bits at the back which screwed in through those holes there, and that mounts ready for the battery tray to go underneath and pin in there. And we've also put the mount for the wibbly wobbly at the back. So the chassis is ready for some electronics. So Tamiya's kit will tell you all about mounting your on-off switch for your ESC into the holes provided. Now, unfortunately, these ESC, or certainly the Hobbywing ones, don't do that easily. So I am going to put the Hobbywing ESC into the chassis as intended with some double-sided sticky tape. But the Hobbywings also have this little groove here. And what you can get is you can get the switch and you can just slide it, he says. So it's just attached to the groove on the side. So my switch is now on the side of my ESC. So when I mount that up into the chassis, the switch will be there on the ESC rather than being mounted into this slot at the side. So that's what we're going to do. And then the receiver will go. Step 9 nicely invites you to use the cable ties provided to tidy up all of your cables internally, which, yeah, I'm not going to do just yet. I'll probably do that at the end once I've decided that I'm happy with where everything is. But it's a good time to take stock of the fact that that does need doing. And then I'm going to move on to step 10, which is building up these real axle stays. Now, these can be a little bit tricky because we're going to use those to mount this rear gearbox. So the first things first, you've got to get these little tiny springs, and you've got to load them into these two parts here. If I'm honest, I don't tend to grease these because that can attract dirt. And then you've got to screw those into the chassis and then thread the bar through the gearbox and make sure that you get the other side connected. This is very fiddly. I am not going to try and do it on camera. I'm going to go ahead and do that. I might show you if I get these mounted up. I'm going to go ahead and build those up. There are some instructions on the side of how to do it. Yeah, not an easy step. This is probably the hardest part of the build. So it will look something like that. And you're going to slide the bar underneath these springs, then load it and allow it to flex up and down and be a bit sort of resisted by the spring. This mounting onto the chassis is very fiddly. You have been warned. When you've done it, it should look something like that. So there's two springs either side, and then that moves up and down and can rotate backwards and forwards. So we have the gearbox mounted to the back. We've done steps 10 and we've done steps 11. We are now on to step number 12, which is where I have to change over to this, which is the black edition instructions, because they do vary to standard instructions because we're not building friction shocks, we're going to be building oil-filled shocks. Now the difference is a friction-filled shock has a screw that goes and mounts directly into the top of the shock. It has a spring, and that whole barrel, yep, is just held together by a screw, and the spring works against the barrel up and down. An oil-filled shock works differently because the barrel is filled, it has a piston inside, it is filled with oil, and then the resistance and the pressure within is maintained by the oil. What happens is you can change the viscosity of the oil to allow the dampening to be harder or softer, depending on what ground you're running on. So it's very clever. It's a way of fine-tuning your suspension, which you don't get to do in a friction shock because it's just one piece and it's all fitted together. So let's start working through this on how we build up some oil-filled dampers. Okay, step 12, we're doing our front arms. And these here are the steering knuckles that go in between, so they're called uprights. That whole thing is an upright. And what we're going to do is we've got these step screws here, which have a rod as well as a tiny bit of screw at the top. And they go through there, as in a rod, and then they just grip with that top part of the screw. So screw that in. Now, I don't like these because if you take them out and put them in many times, they end up wearing out. But for now, that is perfect. Again, the kit says to grease that up, but I've never found putting grease into them actually adds any benefit, because all you're doing is introducing something that's going to grab dirt as we drive our cars out in the mud. And for me, dirt, especially the sort of mud and dirt that I run on, can act as an abrasive in there and do more damage than good, in my opinion. So both of those in. Good. So we put those in. And then in addition to that, we've got these little ball connectors here, which are just going to go right on the outside of that upright. Now these here are bigger than the hex drivers that I've got. So, or the nut drivers that I've got. So what you've got here, you get one of these in every Tamiya kit. It's Tamiya Cross, and that should have a part. And then I'm going to use that to help me put it into this upright. So we're going to go round and round and get that into the upright there. There we go. Once it gets going, it gets a lot easier. It might have been easier to do this before I put the upright onto the buggy, but it's too late now. No backing out. So we're just gonna go for it. If you're doing this at home, I suggest you put those on the uprights beforehand. So there's that one. And we're going to repeat the same over here. Arms are done and together. That is step number 1. Step number 12. Step number 13, we're going to now fit those to the chassis. So I am going to carefully turn my chassis upside down. I'm going to cut this brace piece out, get that bumper, and we're going to assemble that front section. And we're going to just sit them. You see that? Locate them into the grooves there. So that's one that side. The other one goes this way, slides in at the front, locates there. Steering is there and it lines up with each side. Then we need the brace part that I've just cut off that goes in there, like so. And we need a couple of 12 mils, and that holds the front arms together. It's a very, very simple system, but I can tell you it is pretty robust. Tamiya uses this setup on, the Hornet is very, very similar to the Grasshopper. The Tamiya Lunchbox and Midnight Pumpkin on the CW01 chassis has a very similar front arm setup. They are a little different because that is a monster truck and not a buggy. And then this is going to go, get it the right way around. Got it the wrong way around. It's going to go on there like that. 1, 2, 3. I love the big bumper that comes on the Grasshopper because lots of buggies these days don't have a great big bumper at the front, on the basis that I suppose modern day RC drivers don't crash their RCs, so they don't need a great big bumper protecting from the impacts. Because I can tell you for free, back in the 80s, when we used to rock our Grasshopper around, I definitely needed a great big whacking bumper on the front of it because we had quite a few impacts that bumper will have saved. Right, there we go. It is starting to look like an RC buggy, isn't it? Right, let's attempt to build some oil-filled shocks. So, I'll show you where we are. We've cut all the parts out here. What we're going to do is build up one of the smaller shocks over here. So, we take the shock. This is the shock body here. And inside there, we're going to put 2 of these very, very small O-rings. And they're like rubber seals, essentially. That's what they're going to act as, and they poke in there. And then what I should have done, and I forgot to do because I'm trying to do it on the camera, is just pop a little bit of the lovely Tamiya oil here, this Tamiya soft oil, which is the yellow one. I'm just going to put a little drop of that. There it comes, look. Inside there. And that just lubricates the rings, no pun intended, so they don't tear or rip when we put the shock through. So now we're going to screw the end cap on there, all the way so it's nice and tight. Then we're going to get one of our shock pistons here, and we're going to poke that through like so, and that's where the oil comes in, because it just makes sure that that doesn't rip or tear any of those. And we're going to pull that through like so. So that is all the way down the end of there and there like that. And we're going to pop off part V2, which is the big one here. Cut that off. It's not easy to cut these when you're behind the camera. There we go. Got that there. And then this just screws on the end here. And there's no set distance that these have to go on. So what I tend to do is I tend to screw them on until I feel there's a little bit of resistance. And then I just keep going until I get to the end of the thread. You see that? And once I've got resistance, like that, I tend to stop, because that's when I think I've gone far enough. You have to be really careful. I've done it in the past where I've gone too far. And certainly when you're using like the shorter one here, the end of the shaft can pop out into there and it wrecks the whole thing. So you do have to be very, very careful. So I think that's far enough for this. And then I'm going to repeat that through the rest of these. Now what will be slightly different over here when we do the longer ones is they're going to use this little collar here, and that's going to go in between the shafts. So maybe I'll just do one of those and show you how they're different. So we're going to pop the O-rings in exactly the same as we did in here. Put a drop of oil in, just like that. That's enough, just like that. We're going to... That's two spacers. So there's a spacer on the inside, which is 11. Where's 11? In there. So that little spacer there. It's going to go on the inside of the shock. So take that out. And then spacer 3, which is that one there, is going to go on the outside. So this goes, spacer 11 goes on first. That then, oh, get ahead of myself. Forgot to put the cap back on. Cap on. Like that. Spacer 11's on there. That then goes through. Like so. And then we're going to slide that spacer onto there. Then we're going to use X2 from this tree, which is the same length. The big one's going on here. And I'm going to put that on exactly the same way. I'm just going to thread it down until I get resistance. If you wanted to go a bit further and just nip the rest of that up, that's where I would then use that shock tool. So I'd pop that round the shaft there, hold that tight, and then just turn that the rest of the way. You see? In fact, we'll do that with both of these. Just tighten them up. There. Right, I'm going to repeat and do that for the other two shocks, and then I'll show you how you fill them with oil. This is where there is another device that I forgot to tell you about, because what we're now going to do is we're going to fill these shocks with oil. And what's really handy is if you have one of these, and this is an RC car stand. And the reason these are useful is they're useful because they allow you the right holes to put the shocks into when you're filling them up with oil, but also your car can sit on there so it keeps it off the bench when you're working on it. So we're going to take our oil And we're now going to fill each of these up until they fill up to the top. And I'm going to do it flat up here, so you won't be able to see it. But what we're going to do is we're going to put the oil in until it comes up to the top of each shock. Just so you can just about see it over the top of the shock. You should be able to see that on the camera. So you just fill it up until you can see it at the top. A lot more going into this one. There we go, right at the top. Trust me, you will make mistakes with this, and the instructions very much tells you to ensure that you have some tissue paper handy for when it inevitably flows over the top and you end up in a mess, which, yes, I have done. In fact, I did it the other day when I was building another kit. Got carried away and oil everywhere. Right, they are all filled to the brim. You do get quite a lot of oil inside that Tamiya oil kit, which is pretty great. So when we filled it all the way up to the top, what it now asks us to do is holding the top of the piston, holding the top of the shock, sorry, the bottom of the piston, is slide that up and down. And what that does is it moves any bubbles, air bubbles, in and out of the shock. I'm going to do the same, repeat the same for each of them, and just move any air bubbles. There's quite a few that came in there. And what we might see is that the level of the oil might drop. I think that one has dropped a little bit. And if it drops considerably, then we can just top it up at the end with a little bit of extra. So the two end ones here, the two little ones, have worked really, really well. If I can just move the camera up so you can see. There you go. You see there's no bubbles in there really now, in any of them. There's a few in that end one there. I'll just give that a couple of minutes for those to lift out, and then I'll show you what the next step is. Right, I've given it some time, all the bubbles are out. So what I now do is I get these little diaphragms, you see these? And these are going to go on the top of each shock. So there are green ones go on the fronts. So you just pop them on top like so. One there. One there. And the red diaphragms go on the rear shocks, 1 and 2. And then you're going to get the shock caps, which are here. And you're going to screw the shock caps onto the top over the diaphragm, and this is where you might find that loads of oil leaks out. So I'm just going to pull that one out, screw that all the way down, until it's tight, and looks like we've got away from that. And then now we've got a shock that rebounds slightly. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of them, and then I'll show you what the next step is. Okay, so the final step we have to do is get our spring. We've got one for the front shock here, and we're going to slide that over the top. And then we have this little collar that goes into the bottom, and you locate the opening, slide that in. That sits over, oops, a daisy. That doesn't normally happen. That sits over the shock there. The spring goes back against it, and what you've got now is a shock absorber. And then these collars here go on the top to adjust the tension in the spring. So now we've got a nice oil-filled damper ready to go onto our buggy. And I'm now going to do the rest of them. They all look like this, and then I will show you how they attach in part 16 to the buggy. I'm going to fit the rear ones first because they seem to be a little bit more straightforward. So now I've got my driver, my nut driver here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these little ball connectors at the top up here. So they're mounting right up here on the top of the chassis, like so. Apologise for the beeping in the background. You can hear that. My dryer has just finished doing its thing. It's awaiting its next instruction. And then the other one is going to go here on these little brackets we attached earlier on the bottom. So let's put that on there. We are then going to take the rear shock and we're going to pop it on the bottom. So you'll hear it snap on. There we go. And then you do exactly the same to the top. It's quite a bit of force. And that is how the rear gearbox is going to work. So we're going to do exactly the same on the other side. And then the back gearbox will be completed. Right, the rear was nice and simple, popping those ball cups on. The front's a little bit more involved. So the first thing I've got to do is take these brackets here and these screws. And they are going to go through the inside of this bracket, if I can make it happen on camera, no pressure, like that. And then they are going to go through there, he says confidently, and attach to this nut here. Just to lift that through, there we go. And then, because I've got that underneath now, I can just start screwing this nut on the top, just so I've got it locked in. There we go. And then that, if I just keep going, that'll eventually tighten up. Yep. What I'll do is get a screwdriver into there in a minute and just tighten that through. So that's on enough to keep that nice and tight. Do the same this side and then tighten them up with a screwdriver and the hex driver. So notice the position of those facing forward. So the next thing to do is to attach the shocks. Now the shocks go on the front there, and then they go, so they go through there, and they go through the arm down here. So we're going to attach the tops first, I think, because they're slightly easier to do. So to attach the tops, I need this length of screw here, and that quite simply is just going to feed through like so. Nice and easy, nothing else involved. And I get one of these screws and I'm just going to tighten that up like so. And then again, you need to use your multi-skill, put that on the back, get the nut in place with the nut driver, and then the screwdriver comes in from this way. Now this might be easier to put the screw in place, hold the screwdriver and turn the nut. And just be careful when you're doing this, you don't bend your drive shaft, so your steering arms down there. Nearly there, nice and tight. That looks pretty good, still able to move. That's going to clip on there like that eventually. But perhaps before I do that, I'll just get the bottom of this arm connected up. So to do that, I have to get one of these little tubes. I'll need those now. So they're going to go, oh, I just realised I should have put one of those in the top. I'm just going to take the top off. Those tubes go inside. Those were a little bit difficult to get in, but we've made it and we've achieved the suspension. So my advice there is put the top ones on first, then slide the shock all the way through the bottom, into the collar, and then push it back up. Hold it with your finger, thread the screw through with the other one, and there you go. Right, step 16 has been done, which then we're back to the manual for step 17, which is fitting the tyres. So let me show you how easy that is to do. Right, I'll try and show you a rear tyre. So the way to get the tyres in, lots of people will look at this and try and push it in, but that's not the best way of doing it. The best way of doing it is to actually put the tyre in, or put it in horizontal. So you slide the wheel into the tyre, like so. And then once it's in there, you're going to twist the wheel 90 degrees. Now it looks a lot easier than it really is. So all I've done there is twisted that wheel, and that pops the one side on, and then the back is where you've probably got to use a little bit of muscle just to work that on. And once it's on, you pull the side wall of the tyre away, and then the tyre magically fits onto the wheel. And it is as simple as it looks. So hopefully I've made that really straightforward. Do a front as well, so you get to see both of them. We're going to do exactly the same thing, the front and the side. There's no specific way of putting these tyres on, so you just go all the way in, and then we're going to 90 degree turn it. You'll hear the tyre sort of pop onto some of the grooves. It is a lot easier to do the rear ones than it is to do the front ones on these. The front ones are renowned for being very, very, very hard. As you can see, I'm just working that round, yeah, getting the tyre on, and then I can just start to pull it away, make sure both front and rears are on, and then I'm just going to pull it and work the tyre onto the rim. There we go, and that is the front wheel on and done, I think. You'll know if it's on because you'll be able to feel that it's in the right place. You just work it round, and there we go. 2 tyres on, just like that. These are the rims. So as you go with both tyres, you'll see you're trying to work it onto those grooves essentially, and those grooves go in the middle. If you look in the middle of the tyre, yeah, and then you look at those grooves, they match up. So you're getting those grooves onto the rim of the tyre. So with our tyres on and our fingers saved, we are now going to mount the tyres to the buggy. And to do that, we're going to need the remainder of our bearings, and you pop one in the front of the wheel there, and you popped the other in the rear of the wheel like so. Sorry, you're on the side there, aren't you? So a bearing in the front and a bearing in the back. So that's the front wheels. And then it's simply a case of sliding that onto the front hub. Getting one of the wheel nuts. So on the front, to make sure you use the right ones. The front is going to be these 4mm ones here, not the flanged ones. The flanged ones are going on the back. So you see the difference. This one's got like a flange, a rib around it. Yeah, do you see that? And the other one's just a standard nut. So that goes on. Get the right size driver, and then we're just turning that on until it goes tight against the wheel, and that should be spinning completely freely. So the rears are a new one for me. What you've got is you've got a cross on the rear hub. These are the rear hubs. So you get that cross, and what you get is a little tiny pin like this. You see there's a hole there on the wheel. I'm going to turn that so it's horizontal. I am going to thread that through like so. If it's horizontal, it should just stay in place. You're going to get the hub. You put that on until it locates, which it has. So you'll see now in there, that is on that hex. I'm going to get one of my rear wheels, and inside there is 4 little indents that fit the wheel onto the hub, just like that. Then once that's on, we're going to have flange nut, pop it in, and we're going to tighten that bad boy right up. Now for this one, you have to hold the wheel. Yeah, make sure you hold the wheel tight, otherwise it just starts spinning. And then that one is hooked up to the gearbox. And we're going to do exactly the same on the other side. And just like that, you have completed your buggy. Front suspension working nicely with those CVAs. Rear suspension also working nicely. All that's left for you to do is to whack a battery pack in and give it a blast. And what I've just realised with this particular version of the Grasshopper is there's no hole at the top for my hump pack. So this will take just a standard stick pack in it. You don't need the hump pack, which is really, really good news. What's left me to do? Well, I've got to put a battery pack in and check that the wheel alignment is nice and straight, having put the steering on, and just figure around with that and make sure that's all okay. Test the gearbox works nicely. And the next thing I've got to do is work on the body shell, which when it's all completed will go something like that onto the buggy. And we'll put the stickers on, put some body pins in the front. Body pins look like this here. So they go in the front and they hold the body in place. And then we are ready to go and give it a drive and see how it gets on. I must say it's a very, very, very good looking buggy. I like the way that's turned out. I hope you found that useful. I am not going to spend time showing you how you do stickers and how you paint an RC body because, well, I'm just not very good at that. But I hope you can see how easy it is to build a RC kit. It's not hard. They do get difficult. The more you build, the more complicated they become, and there are more steps. And I mean, some of the sort of really modern buggies, certainly not the entry level ones like the DTO3 and the DTO2, but I'm talking about like a TD2 or a TD4. There's an awful lot of steps in there. And if you're getting into RC for the first time, and this is the first RC video that you're watching, and you really want to build one up, I would suggest starting with something like a Grasshopper. Now, performance-wise, this is not going to win any races. It's not going to set the world alight. But it's a good place to start. It allows you to be able to see what a kit's like and how it comes together. But I would also recommend the DTO2 and the DTO3 for a beginner, or also the TTO2B, which is the four-wheel drive variant. The cat has decided to come and cause final chaos, as if it could not have the final stages of a build being done without it coming along and causing all sorts of chaos. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it works as a good guide for a beginner wanting to get into the hobby. And if you have enjoyed what you've seen, please consider checking out some of my other videos. We do an awful lot of stuff on this channel. We do some time trials and we see how buggies, various different RC buggies compare to each other. We get out and do some speed runs, we build some kits, and we just have a good old time with the RC hobby. My name has been Craig. Thank you for being watching. If you've made it to the end of here, I appreciate you, and so does Joey, who is just deciding to come and check that this buggy has been built to his specification. See you all soon. Bye for now.